So, have you ever wanted to work in another country, perhaps because it has a bigger industry over there, or bigger, more mainstream projects such as Hollywood films, or to leverage your career, to be able to travel the world and get paid to do that, get a lot of life experiences? There are many different reasons to want to travel, work in other countries, including to be able to leverage the experience you get from working in a bigger city like Vancouver or LA, New York, and then go back to a smaller city or country and be able to use that to be able to negotiate a higher rate with a lot more other options that you probably wouldn't have had otherwise. So here's the thing. To work in another country or to get a work visa, you need to qualify for it. So before an employer can hire you, you have to fit the criteria to get the work visa in the first place. So most of us realize this when it's too late, when we need the job and we have the job offer, but we don't qualify for the visa. And then it's back to square one where we've got to start building up all the criteria that we need. I'm going to talk about exactly what you need and how to go about getting a work visa so that way you can work, in this case, specifically in the United States. But we're also going to talk about green cards. We're also going to talk about working in other countries as well. So, lots to get into. Let's dive in. So before we get started, I want to mention something that I think is really important for all of us as we move into 2020. After all, the point of this YouTube channel is to help creatives level up their skills and their career and give you the toolset to excel in the creative industry. That's why I've teamed up with Skillshare to give you access to their platform, and I think it's really critical for us to focus this year on growth and expanding our skills as we move through 2020. And the best way to do that is to have access to the appropriate information when we need it. There are so many classes on all of the industry software that we use, whether it's 3ds Max, Maya, Houdini, After Effects, Photoshop, and so many others. The best part is that you can get 2 free months of premium membership right now by clicking the link below this video to get instant access. And then you can start your journey to learning new skills that you can use to be more confident in your day-to-day work, as well as open up doors to new opportunities for a brighter future. There are so many different classes ranging from UX and UI design to learning to freelance, marketing and building your brand, and so many more around the creative industry that this is a chance to be able to leverage and build up your skill sets on demand. In other words, when you want to. I want you to make 2020 your year to learn new skills, level up your creativity, and have the knowledge you need to make this a pivotal year to look back on, where everything changed and you never looked back. So if this sounds good, sign up with the link below this video and level up your skills today. Man, so just to jump off subject for a second, because I think this is hilarious. I'm trying to final a movie right now, and so as I'm recording this, I'm literally jumping off of my box where I've been sending all my shots to the director to get finaled, and while I'm waiting for feedback, while they're in LA at Sony at the moment trying to get the whole entire movie wrapped, on Friday night, I'm rushing over here, hitting record, trying to knock this out because I got to get this done tonight too, while I'm waiting for client notes, which I'm going to be darting back and forth on. So I think this is going to be really interesting, and it's definitely been one of those days, but I want to get this video out. I think that this is so critical. But anyway, so before we get started, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. So I've been living as an immigrant in the US, I guess on and off for about 20 years now. And so I've worked in dozens of other countries, from Germany to Canada and everywhere else in between, as well as helping a lot of other artists with getting their work permits and visas as well, both in games, films, as well as other industries. I've helped friends in architecture and other areas too. So all of this information is relevant, and it's also something that I've got a lot of experience in, both helping others as well as going through it myself. On top of that, I've also interviewed a lot of the top immigration lawyers in the world. So that includes Amanda Gillespie, who's one of the top immigration lawyers in the United States, who specializes in specialty visas, as well as the top immigration lawyers for the UK, for Canada. I also interviewed the immigration lawyer for Peter Jackson and James Cameron in New Zealand. So I've been going around speaking with a lot of these experts to get a lot of knowledge around the differences in each country, specifically to do with the film and game industry. So one last thing, I'm not personally a lawyer and I don't pretend to play one. This is a culmination of all my experiences obtaining a visa, as well as interviewing lawyers and helping everyone else, as I just mentioned. So I want to make that clear that I always recommend seeking legal advice, but I'm happy to give you my experiences and with a 100% success rate so far in helping everyone with this, I wanted to share my knowledge on the subject. Okay, so one last thing I just want to quickly mention is obviously you watching this, you take your career seriously. I want to help artists really level up their career and get the success that they deserve. I've posted nearly 250 videos on this channel, specifically around the topics of leveling up your career and how to be a better artist. So make sure to subscribe so that way you can continue to grow your skills and immerse yourself in the core knowledge that you need to have an advantage in the industry. Okay, so how do you go about getting a work visa to work and live in the United States? There was an article that came out a couple of years ago from RSP, or Rising Sun Pictures. They're a big studio in Australia, do amazing work, and they put out this article on a lot of career advice and how to get a job at their studio. Now, the problem is there was a lot of backlash where people were chiming in the comments saying they're racist or that they don't hire certain people from certain countries and all this other crazy stuff. So I had to chime in because I'm good friends with the studio and also love those guys. I love the work they're doing. And the article was from a good place. The problem is a lot of people don't understand how work visas, work permits work. And because of that, they naturally blame the studio when you're the one who's not qualified to live in the other country. Under the rules and prerequisites and the steps involved, you don't match all the flags that are necessary. The studio has nothing to do with whether or not you qualify for a work permit. They're the ones, at least in the US, who need to apply for it on behalf of you, but you're the person who is responsible, in other words, in matching the criteria. So this is critical to mention because a lot of the time it's easy to say, oh, that studio wouldn't hire me, they suck. They're not going to hire you unless they're 100% confident that you actually fit the criteria. In other words, if they're going to spend a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of lawyer time trying to get you a work permit, they need to know that you're able to get it. They need to know that the success rate is relatively high and it's worth pursuing because it takes a long time to go through. There's a lot of work and a lot of money involved. So this is critical for us all to understand, okay, is the politics behind all of this, because it isn't as simple as apply for a job and then if you're good, hire them. If you're coming from another country, then there's a lot more complexity around it, and it's good to understand why and how this works. So picture this. If everyone could just come to LA and come to Hollywood and work in movies and do all that, then what would that look like in the grand scheme of things? If you've got a country that has millions, tens of millions of people populated in this country, and then everyone else in the world who's watched a movie and said, I'd like to go act, or I'd like to go direct, I'd like to go work in visual effects, moves over here and takes all the jobs. This is where the complete country infrastructure would completely flip around, because all the other people coming in would be taking the jobs, and nobody in the country that the government is supporting would be able to find work because all those positions will be filled. So this is where it's tricky, because for you to take a job in the US, they need to first be able to offer that to someone in the US and be able to guarantee or prove to the government that nobody else in that country is actually qualified for this position. And then they're able to offer that position to you and go through the whole entire visa and the entire process involved. That is something critical to think about for a second, is if I'm to move to this country, there needs to be nobody else in that country qualified to do what I do. At least on paper, that's something that you need to think about. Maybe there are plenty of people who can do what you do, but you still need to be able to put a case together to say, I'm qualified beyond anyone else in the country that I'm moving to. And that's exactly what we need to do when we go through all this stuff, is to be able to prove one way or another that there's no one else around. So you're not taking someone else's job, you're doing a job that no one else is qualified to do, and that's why they needed to bring someone in from another country. Okay, so it sounds complex and it sounds also intimidating, like, well, who's to say whether I am the best in the world at this thing or not? But that's exactly why the lawyers and everything else get involved, is because you need to prove that no one else can do the job. So part of that process is that they need to actually go out and look for someone in that country and show proof that they've looked and they couldn't actually have any success finding anyone. Okay, so this is actually part of that process. So when you originally apply for a job and they say, great, we'd love to bring you on, that's when the whole process starts. That's when they get the lawyers involved, or at least HR or human resources on their end is able to start looking over all your information and trying to figure out whether or not it's something that they can present to their lawyers and see if they have a case. But part of that too is that they're going to need to actually go out there and advertise for that position and make sure that no one else is qualified for it before they can move forward with it. So some countries will have certain agreements in place. So for instance, if you're in Spain and you want to go work in Italy, for instance, you're part of the EU. So in other words, you're able to do that. If you're Australian, you want to go work at Weta in New Zealand, you can literally hop on a plane and fly over there and start working. You don't need a work permit. Other countries have different things, like let's say a working holiday visa. So that way you could travel to another country and be able to work there for the duration that you're there. And there's different variations in there. The US doesn't have any of those. So because of that, you need to qualify for that criteria. Okay, so how does the process actually work? First of all, technically, you can't apply for a job. And this is the whole chicken and the egg scenario, that if you were to come to America with the intent to look for work, you'll get booted out and actually banned from the US. In other words, you're not allowed to be going in and looking for work. Whereas you cannot actually apply for a US visa yourself, only the employer can. So this is tricky because of that predicament. So however you go about getting your job offer is up to you, but the only person or the only company that can apply for the visa is actually your employer and not you. So like I said, however you go about doing that, there are dozens of ways to go about it, but the key thing is that they need to make an offer to you and they need to be the one to apply for the visa for you on your behalf. That's very important. You cannot just go in there and start mailing in an application for a visa. You can apply for the green card lottery. I'm not sure if they're still doing it. I heard rumors they're going to discontinue it soon, but you can do that. I've got a couple of friends who actually have gotten their green card that way, which was very fortunate and very lucky. But typically, they need to be the one to make the offer to you and to put in a case with the USCIS to apply for you to be able to come over into the country and work for them. To do that, like I said, you need to be more qualified and better than everyone else in the country. So in other words, on paper, they need to put together a case to be able to show that. So like I said, this doesn't mean that you need to be the best in the world, but on paper, it needs to sound like you're the best in the world. So there are several different types of visas you can get. The most traditional one is the H-1B visa. There's also the E3 visa for Australians that came out around 2006, I think. The O1 visa is the Rockstar visa. In other words, it's for someone of extraordinary ability. And that type of person has a lot more freedom with that visa to be able to freelance and do a lot more with it, as well as potentially they can sponsor other people to come into the country as well. On top of that, there's L1s, J1s, K1s, which the K1 is the fiancé visa. If you ever watched the reality TV show 90 Day Fiancé, that's the one. There's also O2s, which if someone has an O1, marries, you can come in. So there are definitely a lot of other things you can do if you want to get more strategic, but traditionally you're going to be looking at H1B, O1 if you're at that level. And there's a couple other options in there too. So there's a lot more of the intricate stuff that I can get into. Let me know, leave a comment with what questions you have, and I'll definitely address all of the questions that come up, and I'll look at doing future videos as well. But in terms of the typical ones of how long it takes and how much it costs, again, it takes a couple of months to put together your case, and then once the case is ready, it's going to take a couple of more months to go through. So don't be surprised if it takes up to 6 months, maybe even longer sometimes. I remember on Blade, which is the first time I'd ever came over on a visa for a movie, I was originally coming in for pre-production. I was going to help R&D the entire thing and figure out all that stuff. And then unfortunately, my visa took so long that by the time I came in, we're jumping right into production head first at that point. Same thing with when I went to ILM, a couple other places. So, unfortunately, visas do take a long time. It gets very frustrating while waiting, and both for the employer and for the employee as well. So this is something to keep in mind, that maybe you want to continue freelancing or working for other companies, or see if you can potentially work remotely for that company before you come over. Lots of different options, but the more that you're aware of how long a visa takes, the better prepared you are. So that way you're not expecting to come over a week later. I've had some shady stuff in the past where one of my employers made me pay for it all, which is kind of annoying. And one thing I'll also point out is technically they kind of own you and they own your residency there. So in other words, the entire time that you're living in the US, technically you're kind of under the thumb of the employer. And there definitely are companies that are well aware of that, and they intentionally pay people a little bit less until they're able to be independent. So while you have a green card or a work visa, you might be paid less than other people who are American or have permanent status inside of the US. So there's a lot of things like that just to keep in mind. There's nothing bad, but at the same time, just it is part of the politics of working as an immigrant. You're going to be paid a little bit less, but it's partially because they're paying so much for your visa and everything else too, that it's kind of their way of making that money back a little bit. Okay, so the key thing, like I said, is that for you to come over, you need to present evidence. You have to present a case to say that you are the best, that no one else can do what you do. And like I said, it can be a bit intimidating to think that way, but keep in mind, there are plenty of people working over here. It isn't like you have to be Elon Musk or someone very special to qualify. It's just the case, the lawyers, everything that is involved requires you to be able to show or prove that you do have a certain ability and talent, and there's a reason why you're being brought over. Otherwise, it creates that imbalance that I mentioned, and there's a lot of reason behind that. So one thing I'll mention, I saw a fascinating documentary on the BBC probably 15 years ago now called How to Create Your Own Country, and I got really fascinated by this because it actually goes through how to create a new country, and it kind of talks about the immigration policies. I thought it was really interesting because it kind of really validated a lot of what initially sounded really far-fetched with why things are the way that they are. So if you're bored, I think it's like 6 episodes. It might be fun to watch. And I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. Okay, so the key things about your case that you need to be able to present are press, education, brand, awards, everything else that you can, typically in more traditional media. So anytime you're on TV, being interviewed as an expert or mentioned in a book, or you've written a book, or you're in magazine articles, anything like that, any awards that you've received, any other things like that, your education actually plays a role. It's not necessary, and it's definitely changed. I remember talking with Tim Miller from Blur Studio or Deadpool, Terminator, Dark Fate. We were chatting about this back in like 2001, I think. I remember him mentioning this because the way that it's been in the past is that a 4-year degree is necessary to come to the US. And for every year of that degree that you don't have, you would need 4 years experience. So you would need 16 years of work experience to qualify for a visa or a 4-year degree. So that's what it was like back in 2001. And the immigration policies have drastically changed. I was reading in either Forbes or Time magazine years ago on a flight about immigration policies all around the world. Switzerland at the time had the best. They were the most up to date and advanced in terms of how they did things, where if you're a person of value in terms of being a doctor, an artist, or someone else that can contribute to their country, they would reward you. You might be compensated with up to 200,000 euro grant as incentive to come over. In other words, the way that they were doing things was very new, and they kind of saw the benefit of get the best people in the world to live in your country. The economy, everything is going to fluctuate. The US has always been a little bit different, and it's definitely been more of a privilege to move to the US. But at the same time, it's definitely been updated and started to rapidly grow and update in the last 20 years. So I feel like these days it isn't as bad as it was. Like when I first moved to the US in 2003, I think, I didn't meet another Australian for a very long time. And then the E3 visa came out, which made it a lot easier for them to come over. And bit by bit, over time, the rules have gotten easier and more lenient as the world's kind of globalized a lot more. So keeping that in mind, the education isn't as critical as it used to be. If you have a degree, awesome. If you don't, I think there's better ways to spend your money in 4 years of your life than doing that. And you can definitely work around it. Just usually it comes down to experience and press, awards, those sorts of things. So the key thing is, what can I do right now to get started? So most people wait until they got their dream job. They're going to go to ILM or Sony or wherever they want. Once they get that job offer, they're golden. All they need is that work permit. They can come over to the US and everything's going to be great. And that's when they apply, they go through the whole thing, and they realize that they don't qualify for a visa. And then they have to wait years to build a case. And that's so frustrating, and I've been there. So the key thing is there is so much you can do now that's going to set you up for later. So in other words, rather than waiting to the last minute, then realizing you have to wait years and years and years before you qualify, it's something to think about. Well, what if I put this all into place now so that way I'm set up for the future? And whether it is the US, whether it's Canada, whether it is wherever you want to work, having your case, having all these things that you need is going to benefit you no matter where you go. So in general, it's better to start thinking ahead and position yourself for that success now. So that way there's no halt on the progress when it comes to needing these things down the line. So keep that in mind. Do it now to save yourself the hassle of later. And on top of that, keep in mind that a lot of this really applies to building your brand. So everything that you're doing doesn't go to waste. It's going to help elevate you in many different ways. So I think the key thing is to start being more conscious about hitting all of these marks that I'm about to bring up as regularly as possible. Before I became a permanent resident of the US, this is something that I was always conscious of. For the last 15 years, I was always building it up. Even once I was working in the US, I continued to build my case. In other words, continue to collect everything, make decisions on certain projects or contributions that I would do based on how it would help improve my chances of visas, green cards, and everything else. I want to set myself up where it was very easy for me to qualify for any visa anywhere in the world. And when it came to me working in other countries, it didn't mean I'd be starting from scratch. I would have all of that material ready to go, and it became a no-brainer. Again, all of this applies globally, not just in the US. One of the biggest things is going to be that you're going to need at least 3 to 5 letters of reference from employers who've known you and worked with you, who typically have some clout. They're high status. So again, for me, I had letters from all the major studios in LA, and that definitely helped being able to drop all these names and be able to say, do you want one from Pixar? Do you want one from ILM? I had everyone lined up and I had backup plans. So I always made sure I had everyone in mind who I wanted for my green card letters, for my work visas, all that stuff. And I would make sure that they're ready to go when I need those letters. So this was something that I always thought about. I would always have good rapport with employers. I would regularly stay in touch. And I would make sure that we are on a personal basis. They're very familiar with my work and what I'm doing, so that way they can write an accurate representation of me as a reference in those letters. So this is a critical step that is necessary. And I've written plenty of letters of reference for other people to help them with their immigration, things like that. And just the same way they've had other people write them for me as well earlier in my career. Another key thing is awards. The more awards, things like that you have, the better. Now, obviously, you can't just go and say, well, okay, where do I get these awards? But again, the more that you get strategic with your career, the more that you can start to think, well, these play a role. So maybe I can start targeting specific projects or studios that are likely to care about that and go through the typical awards circuit when it comes to the VES awards, when it comes to Oscars, when it comes to Emmys, to Promax, to all the typical stuff that a lot of studios will go through. So Super Bowl is definitely a big one where if you get some high profile Super Bowl ads, those are the ones that are going to get a lot of clout, a lot of notoriety, and typically get nominated. Same thing with picking motion graphic studios or certain ones that might iterate, in other words, knock out lots of projects, and typically high profile ones that get a lot of notice. Again, you can start to be a bit more strategic in how you do things by looking at, well, who are the studios that are winning these awards and what's the commonality? Oh, PsyOp, they seem to be getting a lot. Imaginary Forces, they seem to be getting a lot. Who are all the key players? Maybe I should target them as a way to work for them as well. Now, it's not make or break, but like I said, it definitely helps. So short films, all that good stuff. I worked for Blur Studio on Go for Broke, In the Rough, a lot of other short films that did get either nominated or win some awards. Stuff like that helps because it means that there's more of a chance that I can put that on the resume and better my chances. Now, at the same time, like going on forums or YouTube, looking around, like people making short films, you never know what could happen. So again, these are not like the prerequisites, but it's going to better your chances having awards next to your name, having that degree, stuff like that. But if you don't have them, it still comes down to the typical ones I'm about to go through now. The key one here is press. For me, I started getting really aggressive with getting press everywhere I went. I got a lot more aggressive with press in terms of contributing to books, doing chapters, things like that, as well as to magazines. Anywhere where I could get my name mentioned, I'll be doing that because this is all printed media. And slowly, the US is updating their policies and recognizing the internet a little bit more, but it definitely has a lot more clout when you're in a printed published medium, such as a magazine or a book. They're worth their weight in gold. So for me, I started targeting all of these. One of my friends at ILM, who was, I think, at Rhythm Hughes at the time, he was going for his green card pretty soon, and he needed to get some press as well. So that was one thing he started working for me on the side, doing all the covers, because I had a contract for doing all the covers for Popular Mechanics magazine in New York. So we were doing a lot of the covers for that. And what I would do is I'd be hiring him to help out and contribute. And because he was in the US and he's on a work visa, technically he wasn't allowed to work for other companies. So what we had agreed would be that he would do a certain amount of work for a certain value, and I would just buy him plenty of Apple products to compensate for that. So bit by bit, he would get a new iPhone or a new Mac or whatever it might be. And that kind of worked out pretty well for everyone. So key thing was that for him, it allowed him to be able to get covers, things like that are printed media that he can say, yeah, I did all the covers for all these issues of Popular Mechanics magazine, and be able to put that down the resume to help his green card case. So one thing I wanted to mention, a friend of mine, Dan Rorty, I've had him on the podcast a couple of times. He owns Rorty Studios in Vancouver. Previously, he's worked for Microsoft. Dan's worked on Gears of War and a bunch of other projects. So Dan, I thought was interesting. His older website had an about section and actually had like all the awards he's received, all the press, everything listed on there. It was such a subtle thing, but I brought it up one time we were doing a podcast and I mentioned, by the way, when you made that specific page where you're just updating it regularly with all of your press, all your other stuff, were you doing that for notoriety, in other words, to help build your brand and mention all the places you're listed, or were you doing that for a work visa? Because at the time he was actually working for Crystal Dynamics on Tomb Raider, and he was actually working at Lucasfilm as well. So when I mentioned that, he's like, yes, it was actually for the work visa. I thought that was brilliant because I think for most people it would look like, okay, cool, you go to the website and you see all of this press, and it means that, okay, obviously this guy is an expert at what he does. But for me, the way I was looking at it was, this is what he's doing, is building up a list of all his stuff. So that way, when it comes to building his case, you can just forward that page on, which has everything in it, to the lawyers to work out. So in other words, this is something that you can start doing right now. In other words, all the press that you have that when you Google yourself and find, or as you actively now start getting more aggressive in chasing down those jobs, being in magazines, doing interviews, everything that you can to help get your name out there and get notoriety that you can use in your case. You can start to build a page with all of the stuff elegantly put in there that you can then just point your lawyer to and say, here you go. It's also great because it means when you are applying for work, you can say, by the way, pretty confident I qualify for a visa. Here's a page with all my stuff. And they can look through it, pass it to HR, and HR can say, yeah, we're pretty confident. Let's run it by our lawyers. This is something that helps build your brand as well as just be a great place to kind of keep all the media and press, all the places that you're mentioned. But on top of that, you're secretly doing it so that way you've got it all ready when it's time to let loose on the lawyers. So again, have a separate page with all the press and mentions on your website where you continue to update that whenever you're doing new stuff. And then on top of that, start seeking press out wherever you can. Now, on a side note, leave a comment. Let me know what questions you have around this because it's such a big topic. And like I said, I can talk about this for Canada, for the UK, for New Zealand, for other countries too, that might help you more specifically with them. But in addition to that, there might be questions that come up like, well, how do I get magazine stuff? How do I get press? How do I get interviewed? How do I go about doing all these things? If you want to know all that stuff, I'm more than happy to go and talk about different ways to how to get speaking gigs or how to get press, how to get interviews, how to do all these things and be able to build up your brand even more. So let me know in the comments if this is something you want. Even just saying, hey, more info on XYZ subject, that's plenty. When it came time to print out my entire case to go to the US consulate, I had to fly back to Sydney, Australia, go in there. I spent $150 on printing because I had this much stuff. So I brought it all over in a USB stick, printed it all there because I knew it would be too much. But going in there, I knew I was confident that I could get the visa, knowing the amount of evidence that I have, having this content qualify me as an expert, knowing that I would then be able to get a work permit. So like I said, it's not down to the employer, it's down to the government to decide whether or not you qualify to get a work permit to legally work in that country. So because of that, you need to understand the criteria and be able to follow and qualify for that criteria for your case. And by at least understanding that, it helps you know how you're going to prepare, and also that the fate of whether you get the job or not really comes down to how much work you put into building your case in the first place, rather than blaming the employer saying, well, they suck because they didn't hire me. It's probably because they felt like you didn't have a strong enough case that they could go through the process, spend the money, and then get declined 6 or 7 months later. I hope now you at least understand why visas are necessary as well. So like I said, there's so much that goes into this, but the sooner that you start having a plan in place and the more that you work on that, the better off you're going to be. The key thing from here is that I want to know more about what you want to know the specifics about. Obviously, this is a big topic, so I'm curious to know what your big burning questions are. So let me know in the comments about what big burning questions you have. Do you want to know more about how much a visa costs, like the specifics, and break it all down? How to find the best lawyer for your country or the country you're going to? How long the process takes more specifically and how you can speed it up? What options you have around that to expedite it as well? What do you do if your visa gets rejected? Or what if you lose your job? Do you have to leave the country, or what options do you have there? What else can you do to foolproof your case? There's so many different things that we could talk about, including loopholes and other dirty tricks like that as well that we can definitely dive into. In fact, I think another big burning one would be what countries have the most straightforward or lenient policies when it comes to work visas. So again, there's so much we could definitely talk about here. But let me know, leave a comment below with all your questions. I'll do my best to answer them, as well as look at building future videos specifically around this topic once I know that this is something that you want to dig more into. Also, one last thing is let me know what countries you're interested in finding out more information about. Because that's another one too, that maybe you don't have any interest in working in the US, but you are interested in moving to Australia, or whatever it might be. Let me know in the comments. So I wanted this to be a video to kind of start the conversation, but I also wanted it to be the one to start you thinking about, well, I need to start cracking the whip now and doing what I can to set myself up for the future. But like I said, I want this to now be the step one in many, and the more that you let me know about what videos and what topics you want to see covered, I'll start to fill it all out with all the additional information. So for now, thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on future classes and industry advice that I'll be sharing. I post videos a couple of times per week, so if you want to get more and get ahead in your career, learn more, and use this information to your advantage, make sure to subscribe to this channel right now. Finally, leave a comment, even a simple yes, if you want to see more on this topic or other subjects around it. And if you want to really immerse yourself in leveling up your career, I've got a podcast on iTunes where I interview the industry leaders such as from Weta, Framestore, Industrial Light and Magic, Imaginary Forces, dozens of others, including feature film directors, all of them talking about industry advice and how they got to where they are in their career. So you can check that out at allanmckay.com/podcast. And I also have a lot of episodes on immigration and work visas as well on the podcast too. And I'll just add interviews with all the lawyers that I've been mentioning too. So definitely check that out. So I'll leave a link in the notes, but allanmckay.com/podcast. So thanks again for watching, and thank you if you're able to share this video on your Facebook or any other social media platforms so that way others can get value from it as well. Let me get back to finishing this movie.